So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my sketch. So I'm going to be showing you with the turtle sketch, okay? So how to create the forms like this one I have with the turtle, okay? So the first thing, I know I need to work vertically. So I have my paper up and down. Bottom right corner, take a moment and write your name. First name, last name, and hour, please. For those of you that were absent, or those of you that didn't get done with the brainstorming, hopefully you figured out which direction you want to go. If not, just pick one, okay? Once you are done writing your first and last name and hour, flip your paper over. We're going to start by drawing our vanishing point. Now remember, if you want your horizon line to show, you could start with your horizon line, but I'm going to start with my vanishing point. So for my 2020 pandemic one, I started by drawing my vanishing point in the top left corner here. I used about a finger measurement to give it a little space from the top, and then I just made a mark. The dimension of my shapes will angle back to this mark. I just made my dot, okay? Now if you want it in the center, we have to do a little measuring first. So our paper here is 9 inches on the short side. So if we measure to 4.5 inches on the short side, we need to make a little mark. So the short side of our paper is 9 inches long. We need to find the halfway point if we want our vanishing point in the center. So I'm making a mark at 4.5. Then I need to find the halfway point, so I'm going to measure up halfway. This paper is 12 inches tall, okay? So halfway for me would be 6 inches. So I line up my ruler on the mark I just made at the 4.5 inch mark. So my ruler is 4.5 inches in. I line up my 6 at the bottom of my paper. I find my 0. I make a dot. That's my vanishing point, okay? Now if you were working horizontal, you would flip your measurements. You would measure over 6 and you would measure up 4.5 inches, okay? And you would make your dot. So go ahead and get your vanishing point on your paper. Okay, so we are literally just drawing our 3D forms today. So we're not doing anything else. We need to look back at our sketch to help us plan for where we want to put stuff. So for example, if I want to sketch out real quick, just kind of a curved shape saying, okay, I'm going to put my turtle right here. I could keep that nice and light so I leave space for it. I could do that, but we're not spending time drawing our object, okay? So one of the tips I have for you, okay, if you notice where I've placed my boxes, I kept them near the edges. Because my vanishing point is in the middle, that leaves my room for my dimension. Okay, so if you have your vanishing point in the middle, keep your boxes closer to the edges. If you are having trouble with perspective, I would go with the cube. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my ruler. We need to make sure that our boxes are big enough that we can add holes to them for our object to wind through. So I'm going to make my first square 2 inches. So over here to the right of my turtle shell, I made a vertical line that was 2 inches. Then I rotated my ruler, just like we did with our squares on page 9. I'm repeating that same process here. Okay, so we're drawing the part of our object that faces the viewer. And remember, we need to have 5 forms for our object to wind through. So here's my first one. I'm going to go up a little bit, and I'm going to bring it back in just a little bit here. We're going to repeat this step now. So you'll start by drawing your vertical line and then adding your horizontal lines until you create your form. One thing to keep in mind, if we are running low on time, I'm going to ask you to stick with cubes and rectangles only, so squares and rectangles. If you have more time for this project, then I will let you do some unique shapes. So go ahead and draw the part of your object. Now earlier someone was making like a skull shape for their form. If you're doing something like that where it's an object, don't add the details, just do the outside edges. We'll come back and add the details a little bit later, but that way if you make a mistake, it's not in the right spot, you don't have all these details that you're erasing. So if you're not sure what you're doing, just go with squares or rectangles. By keeping your shapes toward the outside edges of your paper, if your vanishing point is in the middle, you're leaving yourself plenty of space for your additional dimension lines. Remember, you need to have 5 forms. Now you might be wondering why I didn't include my horizon line. It wasn't needed for this. If I was moving my vanishing point up more in a different location, then I would definitely want to include my horizon line. So if I wanted mine would run through my vanishing point here. So I could measure down 6 inches on either side and draw my horizon line through the middle of the page. I'm gonna have my turtle overlap this box right here. So I did draw it a little ways into my shell, okay? So I've got my horizon line, I've got my dot. You don't have to have the horizon line, but you can add it if you want to. I've got my vanishing point, and now I've got my 5 squares or rectangles. Once you get it to this point, you know what to do. We've practiced it all last week. We're gonna do our corner check. So this is where I would go to each of my corners and I'd ask myself, can I connect from here to my vanishing point without running into anything? My answer is yes, I'm gonna draw my line. Now remember, we're gonna do some erasing. So I would keep these lines nice and light. I would not press very hard. So I go around to each of my corners and I check, can I connect them? This top one here, I can't connect, so I skip. So then I go on to my next shape. I check this top right one, can't do it. I draw through my box, go to my next one. I can, so I go ahead and I draw my line. I go to my next corner, I check it. I can add this one. I go to my next one, I can't. I would draw through my square, so I skip it. Remember, if your object is on the horizon line or above or below your vanishing point, you're going to have fewer lines. Be sure to check every corner and see if you can connect it to the vanishing point without drawing through your shape. Once you have them all connected to the vanishing point, remember this is what it would look like if your boxes were going to infinity. So we need to then move on to adding our parallel lines to end our dimension. I find the right side of my object, I slide it over however far I want this to go. I'm going to make this one go a little bit further back. So these two lines are both vertical and parallel. Then I'm going to line up my ruler with the bottom side of my object. I'm going to slide it down. I'm going to make my line over. So these two are both horizontal and parallel. Then I can take and erase any of my converging lines that extend beyond that back edge of my box. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing for each of my forms. I line it up with the front of my form. I slide it over however far I want it to go. Do the same thing for the top, line it up. I meet up with the line I just drew, and then I erase. So this is why we did all of those practices, so that you would be ready for this step. Remember, try to leave some space within your form so that you have room for the openings and your object to wind through. If you make them too small or too narrow, you're gonna have some trouble with that. I only have one side here because it's right above my vanishing point. And I go ahead and I erase. So our goal today is to get to this point, okay? So we want to have where we have our vanishing point, we want to have our 5 forms. Tomorrow we will look at how to add openings and how to start winding our object through our forms.